Hey everybody, this is a recording that I'm taking from the Donetsk region. I am here filming on the Konstantinivka axis. I'm going to be heading over in that direction in about 20 minutes actually. So I'm trying to record something quick because there was a big announcement while I was asleep, resting from my embed on the Dnipro Donetsk border with an artillery team attached to Spartan. If anybody wants to Google them, Spartan, if I gotta say it English like. But I wanted to take a pause from the war that I'm seeing right now on the ground to talk about a different war in Gaza before I head out. It seems that a ceasefire has been agreed to. This is fantastic news. It should mean an immediate end to the firing, an immediate end to the bloodshed if everything goes to plan, as was put forward by Trump's and his administrations. Because, I don't think he was the one there writing out each point, but the people around him. The 20-point peace plan, if it is followed to a T, then there's a few things that should happen in the coming hours and days. And I'll go through this quickly so you guys have the time frame before I give my opinion on likelihood of success, likelihood of failure, whether it's a good deal, it's a bad deal. As outlined by Trump last week, key elements of the deal call for Hamas to disarm and give up a future role in governing Gaza, the small seaside territory devastated by the fighting. However, Hamas has not stated it will do this. This is important. The ceasefire agreement is not a favor from anyone, but rather the fruit of the legendary steadfastness of our people. This is from one of Hamas's leaders. Gaza, the graveyard of invaders, was victorious through its steadfastness and unity, imposing its will on the arrogant enemy. And Smoltrich, he came out, he's one of the more far-right members of Netanyahu's government, saying that is a statement, by the way, one of the more far-right members of Netanyahu's government. He wrote that he's against the deal. He's going to lobby against it because he doesn't like the giving up of Palestinian political prisoners, which in exchange for the over 10 living hostages and a bunch of bodies from those who were killed in captivity, they're getting about 2,000 political prisoners, those who were arrested without, and there was no reason ever given, including those who are, accused of murder. So it's quite a large net that's being thrown out on the Palestinian political prisoner side, on the Palestinian, actual crime side when we talk about the murderers, or people who have been arrested and at this point have yet to be formally charged. So this right here is something that I am worried about. Not that, Smoltrich is going to be the one that sinks it, but that there are still elements amongst Hamas and there's still elements amongst the Israeli government, despite the fact that only 8% of the Israeli public oppose this deal, who are not 100% on board. So before we talk about any of the details of the success, that there are people who would like to, on both sides, see this fail. Hamas's members of Hamas who don't want to see the organization give up political power. They don't want to see the government give up arms, especially before there's a concrete pathway towards a Palestinian state, which this agreement does not outline. And on the Israeli side, Smoltrich and others don't like the giving up of Palestinian prisoners, especially those who the Israeli government has accused of murder, who has accused of engaging in acts of terrorism. The way he said is that giving these people up, actually, I have the full quote here. Great fear of the consequences of emptying prisons and releasing the next generation of terror leadership, which will do everything to continue spilling rivers of Jewish blood. God forbid. For this reason alone, we cannot join the short-sighted celebrations and vote in favor of the deal. Now, mind you, the Israeli government has already approved the ceasefire resolution, so Smoltrich is in the minority. And the same thing is true amongst the Israeli population and the Palestinian population who want to see this deal succeed. But the idea that people are talking about this as, okay, we've gotten to peace, fantastic. Or, the peace that lasts 1,000 years or whatever. We're jumping ahead of the gun, okay? We're jumping the gun a bit. In the Congo, we had the Trump administration announce, peace in our times before the ADF burnt down Christian villages and M23 continued scuffling with pro-Congolese government militias. We heard him declare that there was peace in our times when it comes to Azerbaijan and Armenia before the Azerbaijani government said, well, we're actually not we're agreeing to it in person, but we're not officially agreeing to it because the Armenians have yet to change their constitution. So we have a record of Donald Trump coming out and basically saying mission accomplished before the mission is accomplished, with very little backlash due to I would just say the international knowledge of these conflicts. Most Americans are much more worried about Medicaid cuts or the ACA tax credit expansion or the price of groceries, any of these, before they're worried about M23 Congolese rebels or what's going on exactly in the Congo. So there are still a lot of steps that have to be taken before we get anywhere near uh, peace. This is the first significant step towards peace, of course, the ceasefire agreement, but there's still a lot of steps to be taken. And that means that we can't really let our pedal off the metal here. We can't really take a step back. We can't really relax. So, what exactly is the schedule? Here's how it's supposed to go. On Thursday night or Friday, and so far, we have yet to see the Israelis formally bring them back, actually start the process of removing Israeli soldiers yet. It's unclear if that has started, according to CNN and others. But on Thursday night or Friday, as a ceasefire goes into effect, within 24 hours of the Israeli cabinet's approval. So that means within the next 24 hours, uh, a ceasefire has to stop. I mean, it has to start. They have to stop firing, right? And after that 24-hour period, Hamas then has 72 hours to free 20 hostages that are still alive. I said 10. I said over 10, but it's 20. President Trump says this could happen on Monday or Tuesday, meaning that throughout the weekend, they would recover the hostages, take them from strategic locations above ground across the strip, which is what the Gaza administration, Hamas, said they were doing in order to deter further Israeli aggression, because they knew how many Israelis want to see those hostages get home. Now, after those are released, as the hostages are being released, Israel will begin freeing some 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. Again, people without charges, people who are charged with murder, all sorts of people. A further 28 hostages who are presumed dead will have their bodies recovered and returned to the families of the Israelis who had lost their loved ones. Now, this, according to Hamas, may take some time because a lot of these people have died due to bombing. So they're going to be buried under rubble. And like the people talk about how the 67,000 casualty number, death number for the Palestinians might be low because a lot of these bodies are buried under rubble. The same thing is true about the Israeli hostages, with many of them also being buried under rubble. This is expected to take more time. And by Monday, as these 2,000 political prisoners, murderer prisoners, just people without, accusation, blah, 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 all these different people, it's 2,000 people. I haven't gone through the list completely, so I can't, there's a lot of people. I haven't seen the list. But when all these people are released, we're going to start seeing hundreds of trucks of humanitarian aid on Monday, by Monday, as these people are starting to be released, are expected to be allowed to enter Gaza. Tom Fletcher, the UN humanitarian chief, he told reporters that officials have 170,000 metric tons of medicine, aid, and other supplies that are ready for Gaza once they're given the green light. And I also want to be clear that a lot of this aid has been waiting outside Gaza to get into the strip for a very long time now, but they have been denied entry for months and months and months and months. There have been food aid on the border, basically rotting, as they've waited for the moment where they would be given the go-ahead to bring these supplies inside. So that's the timeline as we see it until we start streaming next week and we see the continuation of it. At that point, we're supposed to be seeing the Israeli military start pulling back. And through each phase, this is phase one, then we'll go into phase two, they'll pull back further and further and further until they're in a buffer zone that's within Gazan territory along the border between Israel and the Gaza Strip. And they will remain there until the PA, the Palestinian Authority, headed by Mahmoud Abbas, takes over the Gaza Strip from Hamas, because this deal was very clear that Hamas will give up political authority, Hamas will give up their arms, and Hamas will give up any future in any participation in a future Palestinian election, because they've been basically banished by this deal from Palestinian political life. Now, does this apply to other organizations that engage in violence against Israel, like Palestinian Islamic Jihad, stuff like that? I assume so. I believe I even read somewhere that, Hamas is, of course, the one getting attention, but if you replace Hamas with Palestinian Islamic Jihad, you haven't really gone anywhere. If anything, you might even say you've gone to a group that's even considered by those on the ground to be more extreme, which is saying something, to be more extreme than Hamas. But the general idea is that whatever future Palestinian political project that there is, and this agreement does not say that they will get a state. This agreement just acknowledges that Palestinians want a state, and that the agreement supports the idea of a pathway to a viable two-state solution where the Palestinians get a state. So it's not a concrete plan. There isn't like by this day, after they've given up the hostages, after they've done this, they get a state. After they disarm, they get a state. At no point in this plan do they get a state. It's just an acknowledgement that in the future, the Palestinians want a state. And so that will probably be approached after the final phase of the withdrawal from the Israeli government and when the PA, the Palestinian Authority, takes over the Gaza Strip. There is a lot of potential problems with the Palestinian Authority taking over the Gaza Strip. Right now, Hamas is not the most popular force in the Gaza Strip, but neither was the Palestinian Authority or Mohammed Abbas. Mohammed Abbas is incredibly corrupt. The Palestinian Authority has sometimes been viewed as a cooperator with the Israeli authorities, and that has gotten them some ire from certain Palestinians in the Strip. They had basically been pushed out in the Strip for more than a decade by Hamas, and so they don't really have a lot of ties and roots in the ground there. And so them coming back to rule the Strip will have to be backed up by something, whether that's going to be locals on the ground who see this as the only pathway forward and therefore, join some security force to support the government, or it's going to have to do with the international coalition that the agreement talks about, as well as the United Nations, to make sure that the situation is stable as authorities try to reestablish electricity, try to reestablish medical care, try to reestablish clean water, as all of these systems have been destroyed. The vast majority of the Gaza Strip now is rubble. It is dust. It has been annihilated. It's just most of it is gone. If you look at aerial photographs from the ports in Gaza, from like drone footage, just going over the ruins of what was once, a bustling community, there's nothing left. And this isn't something that's going to take weeks. This is not something that's going to take months. This is something that's going to take years to rebuild water infrastructure, to rebuild all of the electrical infrastructure so people can actually start going back to the homes and living there that they once did. Because right now, most of the Palestinians live in the south of the Gaza Strip and basically a giant tent city. And that is not the future that Palestinians want for themselves. If that is where they're stuck, then the only pathway forward would be radicalization, especially if they're not being allowed to leave the Gaza Strip, as was the case during the war. That will probably change in the months to come. But they need a pathway towards civilization. That's really the only thing you can call it, towards some form of civilization. And my hope is that this will succeed, but there's a lot of sticking points which it might fail. Number one, if there is some sort of clash on the ground after the ceasefire between the Palestinians and the Israelis, that could be a potential point of failure. Provocations from those within Hamas and with those in the Israeli cabinet trying to find a way to reignite fighting. Even though the vast majority of both populations don't want that to happen, both governments are still jostling in some way to both signal victory to their base, as we saw with the Hamas statement, despite the conundrum that they find themselves in, and from how the Israeli government is speaking. So I'm worried about potential provocation. There's also, of course, concerns about what happens once we get to the end of this, and then there's still no like concrete pathway towards a Palestinian state, and there's only just kind of like tacit acknowledgments that people want that, and those within Hamas who are going to be granted amnesty are thinking, well, I still want that. That's still a goal I desire. That's still a goal I want to advocate for. Those outside of Hamas, both those who don't have ties to militant groups and members of other militant groups. Will violence resume if we don't deal with the root causes of this conflict? Probably. Probably. I mean, I know that the violence was so overbearing, so horrific, so destructive. But, time heals wounds. And that's not to say that, losing 150 members of your extended family is something you forget. It's just that the way you perceive it can change with time. And in 50, 60 years, when it's your kids being told these stories and it builds hatred in their chest, and there's still been no solution to the problems that made people think that this was the only option in the first people, that pushed people to join organizations like Hamas, that pushed people to become radicals, or to think that violence was the only way out of the situation, as all people, of course, have the right to violent resistance if they're not getting the political, the political foundations that all people deserve. Of course, terrorism is not the right of all people, but the right of resistance, if you're being denied, representation, if you're being denied proper governance, course, is the right of all peoples. And so it wouldn't surprise me if we don't deal with the root causes, even if this doesn't derail, that we're just going to be right back here given 20, 30 years. And next time we're going to hear people saying, oh my gosh, we should have done this back then. We should have finished the job, quote unquote. You might hear that from the next Smoltrich if he is not around anymore. Or you're going to hear from maybe some radicals saying like, well, if we just would have fought a few more months, we could have broken the will of the, this is almost certainly not true, but it's something that somebody could say. And from the way that Hamas is talking in the at the end of this, that seems to be the signal that they're sending. Even if it's just for PR purposes, that doesn't mean people won't believe it. And that the spoken truth, even if it isn't necessarily the real truth, might become the remembered truth by those who come afterwards. The spoken truth, the declared truth, the ideological truth of the group becomes the internal truth as they fool themselves into believing it. This happens in a lot of authoritarian organizations. Mind you, of course, Hamas has agreed to give up power, but the specifics of these, and this is something that really concerns me, they haven't come out and say, we will give up power, we will lay down arms. They haven't came out and declared that. They've just agreed to the ceasefire, which includes those as terms. So I am worried about the potentiality of Hamas hiding weapons at certain locations while saying they're abiding by the agreement, and then that being pointed to by someone like Smoltrich to reignite violence. There's just so many potential failure points for this, but I don't want to take that away from the fact that this is the closest that we've gotten to the end of the war. This will probably this will see a cessation of violence for at least some time, even if it fails. And this will allow aid, if it lasts till Monday, which is the hope, and I do believe that it will, to see aid come in and start treating people who need medical care, start treating people who need food, start treating people with the basic necessities of life. And so that is something to be celebrated. That is something to support. And I hope that there is nothing but success for this. I don't care if it's Trump deal. I don't care if it's Biden's deal. I don't care if it's Bush's deal. As long as it means less people will suffer, it should get the full support that it deserves. But if it fails, that shouldn't take away the pressure either. That just means going straight back to the drawing board and trying again, because only 8% of the Israeli public oppose this. The vast majority of Palestinians want peace. The desire on the ground is for peace. We just need to put the building blocks in place. And we need to make sure that those building blocks don't just kick the can down the road, because peace today should be peace tomorrow, or it isn't really peace at all.